There are places in this world where the rules of reality bend. Quiet corners of forgotten villages, shadowed mountain paths, and ancient temples buried in dust. Places where rituals older than written history are still whispered about, sometimes practiced, and rarely spoken of openly. These rituals were never meant for outsiders. They were meant for the initiated, the chosen, the marked. Yet somehow they survived the centuries, passed down in fragments. Stories of devotion, sacrifice, fear, and faith, tangled together in ways that make you question what humans are truly capable of. Tonight, you won't just hear about these rituals, you will walk through them. Each one reveals a side of humanity most people prefer to ignore. So sit back, dim the lights, and prepare yourself. Because once you learn what some cultures once called sacred, you'll never look at humanity the same way again.
The Aghori cannibalistic. If you ever walk along the banks of the Ganges River in Varanasi at night, you feel something different in the air, something heavy, ancient, and watching. People come to this city for salvation, but there is another group that comes for something far beyond that, something most of the world avoids. These are the Aghori, an ascetic sect so mysterious that most Indians have never met one, and those who have rarely forget the experience. Their rituals hover between spirituality and taboo, between the sacred and the terrifying, forming a worldview that challenges everything society believes about purity, death, and fear. To understand the Aghori, you have to forget what you know about what is holy and what is forbidden. To them, nothing in existence is impure, nothing is off-limits, nothing is separate from the divine, not even the places society fears the most. Imagine the crackling sound of pyres along the river, flames swaying like restless spirits. Most people stay away from cremation grounds, but for the Aghori, these are temples, raw, unfiltered contact points between the living and the infinite. They believe that true enlightenment comes not from running away from death, but from walking directly into its shadow. Where others see fear, they see truth. Their philosophy is extreme. If everything is sacred, then you must confront the very things society labels as untouchable. They meditate beside funeral pyres, smear ash from the cremation grounds onto their bodies, and perform rituals meant to break their connection to human fear. Every act is symbolic. Every step is a challenge to the borders of reality. To them, death is not the end. It's a doorway, a teacher, a mirror. What unsettles outsiders is not their appearance, though they often look like living phantoms, but their complete rejection of societal norms. They refuse materialism. They detach from ego. They step into darkness deliberately, believing that you cannot understand light unless you've traveled through the deepest shadows. Their rituals, which outsiders call disturbing, are central to stripping away the illusion of separation between life and death. Now, there is one belief often associated with the Aghori that creates the strongest reactions: the use of remains found near cremation sites. This is not a random act, nor an expression of harm. In their worldview, interacting with what remains after life is not an act of cruelty. It is a ritual meant to erase fear, disgust, and the illusions of mortality. It's symbolic, spiritual, and deeply tied to their philosophy that nothing is impure. But it is also the reason society looks at them, with a mixture of fascination and fear. Imagine sitting in a dimly lit hut deep inside a Varanasi alley. The air smells of incense, river mist, and something ancient. You're speaking to an Aghori monk. His voice is calm, steady, as if he carries centuries of memory in his breath. When you ask him why they perform such extreme rituals, he doesn't hesitate. He says, Fear keeps humans chained. We break the chain. To them, fear is the last barrier between ordinary perception and true awareness. They believe enlightenment is impossible if you cling to fear, fear of death, fear of impurity, fear of the unknown. So they face those things directly. Meditation in cremation grounds, rituals involving symbols of mortality, a life stripped of material comfort, total surrender of ego. Their rituals are never meant to shock. They're designed to break human conditioning, those invisible rules society carves into our minds without us even realizing it. And because these rituals confront death in ways most people never would, they have always been wrapped in legends, rumors, and misunderstandings. But the truth is more complex than the stories. Most Aghorists live quietly, far from the public eye, meditating on riverbanks, surviving on minimal food, and spending years in isolation. They are not violent. They do not harm people. Their path is inward, focused on spiritual transcendence. Outsiders see horror. Aghorists see liberation. Yet, even knowing all this, it's hard to shake the eerie feeling surrounding them. You can respect their philosophy. You can intellectually understand their motives. But there's still something haunting about the idea of choosing to live among funeral pyres and embracing what others spend their entire lives avoiding. One traveler described meeting an Aghori at dawn. The river was still, the cremation fires burning low behind them. The monk had been meditating all night. When he opened his eyes, he didn't look like he was waking from sleep. He looked like he had returned from somewhere else entirely. Somewhere deep, somewhere wordless. "How do you sit here every night?" the traveler asked. The Aghori smiled faintly. "Because this is where truth lives," he said. "People want the world to be comfortable. We want the world to be honest." That line captures the essence of the Aghori path. Honesty. Brutal, uncompromising honesty about mortality, existence, and the nature of consciousness. They want to dissolve the illusions that scare people into pretending death is something distant, something that happens to others. But perhaps the most unnerving part is this. When you speak to an Aghori, they don't seem afraid of anything. Not the dark, not death, not spirits, not pain. There is a stillness in their eyes, a serenity that comes from confronting the deepest shadows of human experience. And that calmness, that absolute peace, can be more unsettling than any horror story. When the sun rises over Varanasi and the morning bells echo across the Ghats, the Aghori quietly fade back into the mist, leaving behind only the whisper of their philosophy. To understand life, you must walk through the valley of death without trembling. For most people, that path is unimaginable. For the Aghori, it is the only path that leads to freedom. Sati. If you travel through the older villages of Rajasthan or Bengal, you may stumble upon something unusual. A small stone shrine, half buried in dust, with the carved outline of a woman's hand pressed into the surface. Locals walk past these shrines with quiet respect. Travelers look at them with curiosity. But the older generation knows what they mark. They are reminders of a ritual so controversial, so haunting, that even today, centuries later, the air around it feels heavy. That ritual is known as sati. Word itself carries a strange contradiction. In ancient Sanskrit, sati means a virtuous woman, a faithful wife, a woman of purity. But over generations, this word came to be associated with something deeply tragic, the belief that a widow should follow her husband into death as an act of devotion, not because she wanted to die, not because she saw the afterlife as a journey they would take together, but because society expected it, sometimes gently, sometimes forcefully, always powerfully. But to understand why this ritual ever existed, we have to step back into a world that feels impossibly distant from our own, yet its shadows stretch into modern memory. Centuries ago, in many parts of India, a woman's identity was tied completely to her husband. He was her home, her protector, her connection to society. When he died, it wasn't just grief she faced, it was social death. Widowhood was seen as a curse, a stain that people quietly blamed on the widow as if her presence alone had invited misfortune. In that world, where a widow lost her status, her security, and often her dignity, the idea of sati began to take root. Some believed it was noble, others believed it was spiritual, but many, silently, knew it was an expectation she couldn't escape. Imagine this, a home filled with hushed voices after a death, mourners sitting in corners whispering about what comes next. The widow's eyes lowered, not because she wants to, but because she knows everyone is watching her. Family members speak in coded phrases. Priests recite verses about loyalty and purity. Someone says the word sati without saying it. And suddenly the room grows colder, though no wind passes through. That is how it often began, not with the ritual itself, but with the pressure. Invisible, intangible, yet suffocating. Many historical accounts describe widows who resisted, who cried, who begged to live. But the society around them saw sati as the ultimate symbol of devotion. A woman who agreed to it was praised. Songs were sung about her. Villages honored her memory for generations. Shrines were built in her name. They said she became a goddess, a sati mata. And in this twisted moral framework, a widow who wanted to live was judged harshly. People asked, if she loved him, why would she want to stay behind? The tragedy is not in the ritual itself, but in the way society shaped a woman's choice until it barely existed. Let me paint a moment, not a violent one, not a graphic one, but a human one, which is harder to forget. A widow stands in the courtyard of her home. The sky is dark, not from clouds, but from smoke rising from distant rooftops. The women around her sing hymns with trembling voices, songs meant to sound peaceful, but every note carries fear. The men stand further back, watching quietly. No one says she must go through with the ritual. No one needs to. The pressure is thicker than the air. She looks at her hands. They shake. Not because she doubts her love for her husband, but because she doubts herself. Because every path before her feels wrong, and yet she must choose one. In that moment, she is not thinking about devotion or purity. She is thinking about the life she will lose, or the life she might be forced to live if she refuses. One filled with isolation, blame, suspicion, and silent cruelty. To the outside world, the ritual looked like loyalty. To her, it looked like a door closing forever. There were times, rare but powerful, when a widow refused. Some families protected her fiercely. Some communities embraced her courage. There are stories of widows who rebuilt their lives, who became poets, leaders, teachers. But these stories were whispered, not celebrated, because they challenged the narrative people were taught to believe. And that narrative held power. When the British encountered sati during colonial rule, they were horrified, but also confused. Some Indian scholars defended the ritual as voluntary and sacred. Others condemned it as deeply oppressive. Reformers like Rajaram Mohan Roy fought relentlessly to end the practice, arguing that no ancient scripture demanded it, that it was a social distortion, not a spiritual truth. Their voices eventually led to the formal ban of sati in the 19th century. But laws alone do not erase beliefs. Even after the ban, rare incidents occurred, isolated but powerful reminders of how deeply social expectations can bury themselves in a culture. The most infamous was in the late 20th century, when a teenage girl named Rup Kanwar died under circumstances still debated today. The event shook the entire nation. Some said she chose the ritual willingly. Others insisted she was forced. The truth remains clouded in smoke and memory, like so much of sati's history. But here is the part few people talk about. Most widows throughout history never participated in sati. They lived long lives, often difficult ones, but they chose life. They defied expectations, and their quiet resistance is just as important, just as powerful as the stories of those who couldn't. When you stand before one of those sati stones, those handprints carved into ancient shrines, you feel a strange mix of emotions: respect, sadness, unease, and a haunting sense of closeness to the women who lived in a world that asked too much of them. The ritual of sati was never just about death. It was about society, control, grief, honor, fear, and the struggle of women trying to survive in a world where their identity was not their own. And even though the ritual is gone, its echoes remain, a reminder of how far society can go to preserve a belief and how strong a woman must be just to choose life. Foot binding. If you ever walk through an old Chinese courtyard house, the kind with wooden beams darkened by centuries of smoke, you might hear a strange sound when the wind passes through. A soft tapping, a faint echo, almost like footsteps that never learned how to run. In rural museums, old embroidered shoes sit behind glass, unbelievably small, delicate as bird cages. When you first see them, your mind refuses to accept they were ever worn by adults. These are the remnants of foot binding, one of the most haunting rituals in human history. Not because of what it did physically, but because of the world that created it. To understand why this ritual existed, imagine a society where beauty was not just admired but demanded. A society where a woman's future, her marriage, her safety, her status, depended on her ability to fit into an idea shaped by powerful families and ancient traditions. In that world, a small foot was not just attractive. It was a symbol of discipline, purity, and submission. It was proof that a girl had been raised properly, that she would obey, that she would never rebel. And so, for almost 1,000 years, families took their daughters, often as young as 5 or 6, and prepared them for a ritual that would shape the rest of their lives. But this story is not about the ritual itself. It's about the world around it, the pressure, the expectations, the quiet fear behind closed doors. Picture a little girl in a quiet courtyard. She is playing with a spinning top, chasing after it with laughter in her voice. She doesn't know that today is the day. Her mother watches her with eyes full of worry, dread, and something softer, love twisted by tradition. Behind them, the grandmother sits stiffly, nodding in approval. To her, this is not cruelty. It is duty. It is how their family survives. The girl is called inside. The room is dim, lit by a single lantern. The air feels different, heavy, still. Her mother kneels in front of her, trembling slightly. She holds her daughter's hands and whispers something soothing, something she doesn't quite believe herself. In that moment, the girl doesn't understand what is happening. She only knows her mother is scared. And when a child sees fear in a parent's eyes, the world suddenly becomes colder. But to the family, this ritual represents hope. A girl with bound feet is seen as elegant, desirable, and marriageable. Without it, she could be left with no prospects, no security, no future. The mother knows this. The grandmother knows this. Even the girl eventually will know this. And that is what makes the ritual so haunting. It was not driven by hatred, but by fear of survival in a world that allowed women no choices. Once the process began, life changed forever. Growing up with bound feet meant walking carefully, slowly, gracefully. Every movement required effort. Every step was a lesson. Girls practiced walking in courtyards, taught to sway gently to appear soft and delicate. Elegance was survival. Pain was discipline. Stillness was beauty. To outsiders, this might sound monstrous. But inside those families, the ritual carried pride. Mothers wept quietly at night, but by day they praised their daughters' progress. Neighbors complimented the girl's walk. Suitors' families sent gifts. The ritual was woven into daily life, normalized so deeply that questioning it felt impossible. Now imagine the girl a few years later, maybe 10 or 11. She has learned the special shuffle that women with bound feet develop. She moves slowly, but she has mastered balance. She wears embroidered shoes decorated with silk flowers and birds. Her mother watches her with quiet hope, thinking, now she will have a good life. But the girl sees the world differently. She watches other children run past, laughing freely, feet slapping against the ground. She feels a yearning she can't express. She looks down at her tiny shoes, more like ornaments than footwear, and wonders if she will ever be able to chase the wind again. As she grows older, admiration surrounds her. Visitors compliment her graceful movements, the shape of her feet, the decorative shoes she wears. They call her elegant, refined, delicate. But late at night, when the lanterns are extinguished and the house falls silent, she lies awake listening to the pulse in her feet, steady, haunting, alive. She wonders who she might have been without this ritual. A dancer, a traveler, a girl who could run through fields without stumbling. And yet in that world, most women accepted it as their destiny. They supported one another, shared their stories, compared their embroidered shoes. They found a strange, bittersweet companionship in their shared struggle. They did not see themselves as victims. They saw themselves as daughters, wives, mothers, doing what they had been taught was right. The most haunting part of foot binding is not the ritual itself. It is the silence that surrounded it, the way entire communities accepted it for centuries, the way women endured it because they believed they had no alternative, the way beauty standards, simple, fragile, human-made, became powerful enough to shape bones, lives, and futures. When the practice finally began to decline in the 19th and early 20th centuries, it wasn't because the pain became too great. It was because China began to change. New leaders saw the ritual as backward. Reformers argued passionately that a nation could not rise while half its population was held back. Families began to fear that daughters with bound feet would be seen as old-fashioned, unfit for modern society. And just like that, a ritual that lasted a millennium began to fade. Not overnight, but slowly, like a ghost dissolving into morning light. Today, the tiny shoes remain, brightly embroidered, impossibly small. Museums display them. Travelers stare at them in disbelief. But if you look long enough, the shoes don't look small anymore. They look heavy. They carry the weight of countless lives shaped by a world that demanded beauty at any cost. And when you look at those shoes, you don't just see a ritual. You see an entire society's idea of perfection, one that walked carefully, quietly, painfully through history. The sun dance. If you stand on the Great Plains at dawn, really stand there, with the wind brushing through the tall grass and the entire horizon glowing gold, you understand why the Plains tribes believed this land was alive. The sky feels too big, the earth too wide, the silence too powerful to belong to ordinary life. Everything breathes with a sense of connection, to ancestors, to spirits, to the cycles of the world itself. And once every year in many nations of the plains, there was a ceremony so sacred and so profound that even today, its memory sends a shiver through history. This was the sun dance, not a performance, not a spectacle, but a test of spirit, identity, and connection to something larger than oneself. The sun dance is often talked about in hushed tones because outsiders misunderstood it for centuries. They focused on the physical ordeal and whispered about it like it was something brutal. But to the people who lived it, it was the opposite. It was a ceremony of healing, community, sacrifice, and rebirth. A way to honor the Great Spirit, to give thanks, to pray for the people, and to reconnect with the universe. To understand it, you must picture the world before cars, before electricity, a time when survival depended on the land, the animals, and the strength of a community. Every year, the tribes gathered on open ground. Families set up tipis in circles. Children played in the dust. Elders sat in groups, praying softly. The air was thick with the smell of sage and sweetgrass. You didn't just watch the sun dance, you stepped inside its world. At the center of the ceremony stood the Sun Dance Lodge, a circular structure made of wooden poles, open to the sky in the middle. This opening represented the connection between Earth and the Creator, a path for prayers to travel upward. The central tree in the lodge symbolized life itself. It was chosen with respect, cut with prayers, carried with songs, and placed with ceremony. No part of this ritual was casual. Every action carried intention. For many, the sun dance began long before the dancing itself. Participants fasted for days, cleansing their bodies and minds. They prayed for guidance. Some prayed for their families, some for the sick, some for the tribe's future. The weight of these prayers followed them into the circle. When the ceremony began, drummers took their place outside the lodge. Their beats echoed across the plains, deep, steady, ancient. The dancers entered the circle wearing simple clothing, faces painted with symbols meaningful to their families or visions. They stood facing the central tree, which represented life, strength, and the Creator's presence. And then the dancing began. Not graceful, not elegant, but purposeful, rhythmic steps, slow movements, eyes fixed upward toward the sun. Each dancer moved in time with the heartbeat of the drum, with the hum of prayers carried in the wind. The heat grew intense. The sun climbed higher. Dust rose from the ground with every step. But the dancers didn't stop. They danced for hours, sometimes days, without food or water, not as a test of physical strength, but as an offering, a way of saying, "I give myself so that the people may live." This idea of sacrifice wasn't about suffering. It was about devotion, humility, and the belief that one person could carry prayers powerful enough to help an entire community. The endurance trials served as a symbolic bridge. You step into pain to bring healing. You walk toward hardship to create hope. And then there was the part that outsiders always misunderstood, the moment of the personal test, which varied from tribe to tribe and dancer to dancer. What mattered wasn't the physical challenge, but the meaning behind it. It was an act of deep prayer, a pledge made directly to the Creator. A dancer offered the strongest part of themselves, their endurance, their courage, their devotion, so that someone else might heal or survive or find guidance. There are stories told in soft voices by elders, not sensational tales but quiet lessons. Stories of a man who danced to protect his newborn child, a young woman who danced so her aging father would recover from illness, a warrior who danced not for himself but for peace between tribes. The physical act was secondary, the love behind it was everything. Imagine this moment. A dancer stands in the blazing sun. His breath is slow, steady. The drumbeat trembles through the earth beneath him, syncing with his heartbeat. His eyes are fixed on the sky, not squinting, not shrinking back, but open, devoted. Around him, the world falls away. The crowd fades. The drumming becomes distant. All that remains is the dancer, the earth beneath his feet, and the Creator above him. In that silence, he makes an offering not with words, but with his entire spirit. People watching outside the circle are not silent because they're afraid. They're silent because they are witnessing something sacred, something that doesn't belong to curiosity or entertainment, something that belongs to the soul. When the ritual ended, dancers were helped to the side. Families gathered them in blankets, gave them water, whispered prayers of pride and relief. The entire community treated them not as victims of pain, but as warriors of spirit, people strong enough to carry hope on their shoulders. And in the days that followed, strange things were said to happen. Some dancers had visions. Some received dreams believed to be messages. Some found peace they had never known before. The sun dance was not just a ritual, it was a doorway. But as the world changed, the ceremony faced danger. Colonial governments banned it. Missionaries condemned it. Authorities arrested those who tried to continue it. For a time, the sun dance was forced underground, practiced quietly, privately, but never abandoned. Because how can a people abandon something tied to their identity, their ancestors, their prayers? Today, the sun dance lives again. It is practiced with respect, without the sensationalism outsiders once attached to it. The endurance trials still exist in many nations, but they are approached with care, consent, and deep spiritual preparation. It is not for tourists. It is not for curiosity. It is for the people. If you ever see a sun dance, truly see it. You do not feel fear or shock. You feel something else entirely. Strength, faith, unity, an ancient heartbeat rising again. The sun dance is not a ritual of pain. It is a ritual of connection to the land, to the Creator, to the community, to the deepest part of the human spirit. The blood eagle Norse legend. They say few punishments in ancient legend were as feared as the blood eagle. It wasn't just a method of execution. It was a myth wrapped in terror, a warning passed through the lips of warriors who believed that pain, honor, and the afterlife were all stitched together by the gods themselves. When you hear the words Blood Eagle, it almost sounds poetic, but the truth behind the name has haunted historians, storytellers, and anyone who has dared to imagine what it must have looked like. The legend of the Blood Eagle comes from the sagas of the Norse, ancient stories that blend history and myth into something sharp enough to cut through centuries. Whether the ritual actually happened or whether it was a nightmare invented to intimidate enemies, one thing is certain. The Norse believed that suffering could be transformed into a message, and the Blood Eagle was the loudest message of all. To understand the Blood Eagle, you first have to understand the world it came from. Imagine a landscape of harsh winters, stone-gray seas, and people who believed the gods were watching their every move. Honor wasn't just a social requirement, it was a ticket to the afterlife. If a warrior died bravely, Odin might welcome him into Valhalla. But if a warrior was disgraced, forgotten, cowardly, then he was nothing. The worst fate imaginable wasn't death, it was dying without meaning. This worldview created rituals that seem brutal today. Battles weren't just physical, they were spiritual theater. Victories were dedicated to gods. Defeats were interpreted as divine judgment. And punishments, well, punishments had to fit into this cosmic drama too. That's where the Blood Eagle enters, a ritual that symbolizes the highest form of vengeance and the deepest level of fear. According to the sagas, the Blood Eagle was reserved for only the most hated enemies. Not a random criminal, not an ordinary warrior, only those whose crimes shook an entire family or kingdom. The most famous story involves the Viking hero Ragnar Lodbrok and his sons. When Ragnar was killed by King Aelle of Northumbria, his sons swore revenge. They didn't just want to win, they wanted a punishment so unforgettable that it would echo through the generations. And so, they chose the Blood Eagle. But what actually was the Blood Eagle? The descriptions differ depending on the saga, and scholars still debate whether it was real or symbolic. Some say the ritual involved carving the shape of an eagle into the victim's back, a dark offering to Odin, whose symbol was fittingly an eagle. Others claim it went much further, that the shape wasn't just carved but opened, turning the victim into a grotesque image of a giant bird. But beyond the details, the meaning is what truly matters. The eagle in Norse belief wasn't just a bird. It represented the sky, Odin's realm, and the connection between the mortal world and the divine. Sacrificing someone as an eagle could be seen as sending them directly to the gods, not peacefully, not honorably, but as a warning, a message, a declaration that this is what happens when you betray us. But even within the sagas, the ritual is described in a strangely poetic way. The writers almost avoid the details, as if they themselves couldn't bear to imagine what was happening. Instead, they focus on sound, the chanting, the crackling of fire, the rhythmic drums. They mention the onlookers, silent as stone, watching in the flickering torchlight. They describe the smell of pine resin, the cold wind creeping across the skin, the feeling of something sacred and horrifying unfolding on the frozen earth. Whether the ritual was literal or metaphorical doesn't even matter at this point. The power of the Blood Eagle comes from the image it creates in the mind. The sagas never say the ritual was quick. They never say it was merciful. It was meant to break the soul before the body, to make the condemned understand that they weren't just being punished physically but spiritually, that they wouldn't be remembered as a warrior but as a warning. One of the darkest parts of the Blood Eagle myth is the idea that the victim was expected to remain silent. In Norse culture, showing fear or pain in one's final moments was seen as weakness. So, imagine the psychological terror. You're surrounded by warriors, flames reflecting off their helmets, their breath misting in the cold night air. Your fate has already been decided, and now the only thing left is how you will face it. No man wanted to die a coward. And so, the sagas tell of men who endured the Blood Eagle without making a sound. Whether these tales are exaggerated or not, they reveal how deeply the Norse valued bravery, even in horror. As time passed, the blood eagle transformed into a symbol of the Viking Age's darker side. Modern historians have wrestled with the question, did they really do it? Some say no, that it was a misunderstanding, a symbolic act turned into a literal one over centuries of retellings. Others argue that rituals involving extreme pain did exist across various ancient cultures, so the blood eagle might not be entirely fictional. But the truth is that the ritual's power doesn't come from historical verification. It comes from imagination, from the way the sagas describe vengeance, from the way the Norse believed the soul was shaped by suffering, from the cold beauty of a culture where death wasn't feared but dishonor was. When you picture the blood eagle, don't think of it as a mere execution. Think of it as a story designed to make your spine tremble, a ritual whispered in longhouses, retold by firelight, spreading across centuries with the same chilling weight. A reminder of a time when honor meant everything, and punishment was crafted not just to kill a man, but to etch his downfall into history. In the end, the blood eagle is more than a legend. It is a mirror held up to the darkest corners of human belief, a place where spirituality collides with brutality, where myth meets fear, and where the line between devotion and destruction blurs into something unforgettable. A ritual that may or may not have happened. But once you hear the name, you never forget it. Mesoamerica. In the heart of ancient Mesoamerica, where towering temples cut through the sky and the sun glowed a deep, almost supernatural gold, the Aztec Empire thrived on a belief so powerful that it shaped every breath, every ritual, every heartbeat. At the center of their world stood an idea both mesmerizing and terrifying. The universe must be fed, and only blood, human blood, could keep it alive. For the Aztecs, sacrifice wasn't cruelty. It wasn't madness. It was duty. The same way we think the sun will rise tomorrow, they believed it rose only because someone paid for it. Somewhere on a stone altar, someone offered everything so that the world wouldn't fall into darkness. To understand this ritual, you have to imagine what life was like in Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, a breathtaking city of canals, white stone temples, floating gardens, and markets overflowing with cacao, feathers, jade, and obsidian. Nothing looked primitive. Nothing felt accidental. This was a civilization of astronomers, engineers, poets, warriors, and priests. And yet, beneath this beauty, a darker pulse beat constantly, the fear that the universe was fragile and must be nourished to survive. The Aztecs believed the gods had sacrificed themselves first, spilled their own divine blood to create the world and push the sun into the sky. So humans were simply returning the favor. Every ritual, every offering, every prayer was part of a great cosmic contract. Without it, the sun might stop, the rains might die, the earth might sleep forever. And so came the sacrifices. The most iconic and the most haunting took place on the temples that loomed above the city. The temple mayor, with its twin staircases reaching toward the heavens, served as the stage for ceremonies that drew thousands. People would gather below, the air thick with incense and heat, drums pounding like the heartbeat of the earth. Warriors in jaguar pelts and eagle feather helmets stood proudly, their faces painted, their eyes burning with purpose. At the top of the steps, the priests waited, men who lived closer to the gods than to ordinary life. Their long robes were decorated with symbols of serpents, suns, and death. Their hands and arms were often stained from rituals of the day before, yet they weren't monsters. In their minds, they weren't taking life. They were preserving the universe. Victims were not always captured enemies, though that was common. Sometimes they were volunteers. Yes, people who believed their sacrifice would guarantee them a place of honor among the gods. To be chosen to die on the altar wasn't shame, it was glory. Imagine the moment. A young man ascends the steps, surrounded by warriors. The crowd watches silently. The wind moves across the temple plaza like a whisper. Drums echo. And high above, the sun, the very reason for all of this, burns hotter than ever. The man lies on the stone altar, carved in the shape of a reclining god. Priests hold him steady, speaking prayers older than memory. Then the ritual begins quick, precise, sacred. The idea was not to prolong suffering, it was to free the heart, the most precious offering a human could give. In Aztec belief, the heart held something like a spark, a piece of the sun itself. Returning it was the ultimate act of devotion. When the heart was raised to the sky, the crowd sometimes fell into tears, sometimes into chants, sometimes into stunned, breathless silence. To them, they were watching not a death but a cosmic renewal. The body itself didn't always go to waste. In some ceremonies, especially involving warriors or prisoners of rank, the flesh was seen as spiritually powerful and consumed in ritual meals. Not out of savagery, but out of reverence. The idea was that strength could be transferred, courage absorbed, essence recycled. Life was never simply destroyed, it was transformed. But there were other rituals too, darker, stranger, and wrapped in layers of symbolism. During the festival of Toxcatl, a young man impersonated the god Tezcatlipoca for an entire year. He lived like a deity, adorned in jewels, taught to play the flute, followed by attendants. People bowed as he passed. They treated him as the living embodiment of a god until the final day of the festival, when he climbed the temple stairs, broke his flute, and offered himself to the ritual. One moment divine, the next sacrificed. A chilling reminder that gods, like humans, must die and be reborn. Another ritual involved warriors dressed as hummingbirds, representing Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun. These rituals were loud, fierce, drenched in color and energy. In contrast, the sacrifices to Tlaloc, the rain god, were heavy with sorrow. Children were offered because their tears were believed to summon rain. The priests sought children whose cries echoed strongly, a heartbreaking requirement derived from belief, not cruelty. But to truly understand how the Aztecs justified all of this, you must look at the night sky through their eyes. To them, every star was a god, every eclipse a warning, every drought a message. The world wasn't stable, it was delicate. It was always on the edge of collapse, and only sacrifice held it together. This belief was so powerful that even Spanish conquistadors, hardened from war across continents, wrote in their journals that these rituals shook them to their core, not because they were barbaric, but because they were enormous, structured, and surprisingly spiritual. They couldn't understand how a society so intelligent could embrace a belief so terrifying. But fear was the root, not fear of war, not fear of death. Fear of cosmic darkness. The Aztecs lived with the knowledge of 4 previous worlds, 4 suns, each destroyed by catastrophe, floods, jaguars, hurricanes, famine. They believed they lived under the 5th sun. And this sun, too, could die at any moment unless fed the energy it needed to fight off cosmic destruction. In a way, every sacrifice was a desperate prayer. Let the world survive one more day. Today, when we hear about Aztec sacrifices, we think of cruelty. But to them, it was devotion. To them, it was survival. To them, it was the price of existence. Whether we view it as tragic, brutal, or sacred, the reality remains haunting. An entire civilization believed the universe ran on blood, and they built their greatest cities around this idea. And in the silence of those temples, where wind still brushes the ancient stones and the sky still looks down like an unblinking eye, you can almost feel the weight of that belief, still lingering, still echoing, still pulsing like a heartbeat from a world long vanished. Tophet. In the ancient city of Carthage, once the mighty rival of Rome, there existed a place whispered about in dread, sorrow, and mystery, the Tophet. Today, it sits between archaeology and legend, between fact and accusation, between what might have happened and what people believed happened. But whether truth or terrifying myth, the stories of child offerings in Carthage have echoed for more than 2,000 years, leaving behind a shadow long enough to chill even the modern mind. To understand the ritual, you must first imagine the world it belonged to. Carthage wasn't a crude settlement. It was a glittering empire of trade, wealth, and culture. Its ships ruled the Mediterranean. Its merchants traveled from Africa to Spain to the edge of the known world. Their temples were massive. Their gods were ancient. Their rituals were powerful. At the center of their spiritual life stood the gods Baal, Hammon, and Tanit, deities of the sky, fertility, and protection. They were seen as both givers and takers of life, the kind of gods who could bless a harvest or curse an entire city. And in times of great danger, drought, famine, or war, some ancient writers claim the Carthaginians turned to the most extreme offering imaginable, the sacrifice of children. This practice is described by Greek and Roman historians, though many argue these accounts may have been exaggerated to demonize an enemy. Yet the Tophet, a vast cemetery filled with urns containing the cremated remains of infants and animals, suggests a reality more complicated than propaganda. But let's step back into the past, into the ritual itself, and experience it the way an ancient witness might have. Night falls over Carthage like a violet curtain. Torches burn in the courtyards. The air smells of incense, sweet, heavy, overwhelming. Deep within the temple district lies the Tophet, surrounded by tall stone walls carved with symbols, open hands, crescent moons, star-like patterns. These are the marks of Tanit, the goddess who watches silently from above. Families gather at the entrance. Some carry infants wrapped in fine cloth. Others lead lambs or small animals. Their faces are conflicted, fearful, devout, desperate. For many, this ritual is not cruelty. It is hope, a plea, a bargain with forces they cannot control. In ancient Carthage, every aspect of life was tied to divine balance. If the crops failed, if storms destroyed ships, if sickness spread through the city, it was believed the gods were displeased. And powerful gods required powerful offerings. Priests in flowing robes stand among the crowd. Their faces are expressionless, unreadable. They chant prayers in the old Phoenician tongue, their voices vibrating through the stone pathways. Drums beat softly at first, then louder, building a rhythm that syncs with the pounding hearts of the people gathered. The altar stands in the center of the compound, massive, carved from red stone, marked with ancient symbols. Behind it rises the bronze statue of Baal Hammon, arms extended, palms open. Flames flicker around its base, casting dancing shadows that make the god look alive. And the ritual begins. It is said that when a family offered their child, it was not viewed as a loss, but as a sacred gift ensuring divine favor, a chance for the child's soul to join the gods themselves, to live eternally in power, not fragility. These beliefs made the unthinkable in their eyes almost bearable. The mother steps forward first. Her hands shake. She carries her baby close, whispering something only the child and perhaps the gods can hear. Her face is not angry or harsh. It is devastated, but beneath the pain there is conviction. She believes this is the only way to save her family, to save her city. Priests approach her gently. They do not snatch the child. They receive it like a holy offering. The drums slow. The chanting deepens. The air thickens with smoke and anticipation. Then the ritual flame is lit. Some accounts describe the child being placed upon the burning altar. Others describe the child being taken behind the statue, where a chamber would receive the offering. Yet others say the priests performed the act swiftly and solemnly, shielding the mother from the sight. And still, there is another possibility, found in the bones at the Tophet, that many children who were offered had already died naturally, that the ritual was not always sacrifice but funerary dedication, a way to send a deceased child into the afterlife with divine protection. But ritual or funeral, sacrifice or remembrance, one thing is certain. The moment was heavy with meaning. The fire roars, growing higher, brighter, almost hungry. Sparks drift into the night sky like tiny souls rising upward. The priests chant a final prayer, calling on Tanit to accept the offering, to bring rain, to protect ships, to restore fertility to the land. The crowd kneels. Some cry. Some press their foreheads to the earth. Some stare blankly, hollowed by grief. But then something changes. A breeze sweeps through the temple grounds. The smoke shifts direction. The drums fall silent as if waiting. For the Carthaginians, this was a sign the gods had heard. The offering, no matter its form, had been received, and hope, fragile but powerful, bloomed in their chests again. When the fire finally dies down, priests gather what remains, ashes, bone fragments, charcoal, and place them carefully into urns. Each urn is sealed with clay and marked with symbols of Tanit or Baal. Thousands of these urns fill the Tophet, rows upon rows. It is a place of loss, devotion, fear, and love all at once. To modern eyes, the ritual feels monstrous, unthinkable, but to the Carthaginians, it was the ultimate act of faith, a way to negotiate with a universe they believed was alive, emotional, and dangerous. Their world was not built on logic. It was built on relationships with gods who demanded attention, sacrifice, and loyalty. Today, archaeologists and historians still argue, was it truly sacrifice or ritual burial? Were the Romans exaggerating to vilify an enemy, or were they describing a horrifying truth? The earth of Carthage refuses to give a simple answer. What remains is the echo of a ritual that straddles the line between the sacred and the unimaginable, a ceremony that blends devotion with dread, a reminder that ancient belief systems were shaped by forces we no longer feel, fear of famine, unpredictable gods, the fragility of life. The Tophet is silent now. The fires are gone, the altars are cold. But the whispers remain. And the question, whether born from truth or legend, still lingers like smoke. What would a civilization do to survive? And what would it give to its gods? The ghost marriage ritual. In the quiet rural stretches of China, where mountains fade into mist and villages sleep beneath ancient roofs, there exists a ritual that feels like it belongs to another world, a place where the living and the dead still speak to each other. It is called ghost marriage, a tradition where people marry not another living partner, but someone who has already died. To outsiders, the idea sounds chilling, even supernatural. But to the families who practice it, ghost marriage is not horror. It is duty, protection, and sometimes desperate love. To understand this ritual, you must first understand the belief that life doesn't simply end with death. In Chinese tradition, the soul lingers, watching, waiting, needing things the living must provide: respect, offerings, remembrance. A soul left without these things becomes restless, wandering between worlds with sorrow or anger heavy in its chest. And so, families seek to keep harmony not only among the living, but among the spirits who came before them. Ghost marriage is born from that fear and that love. The ritual dates back centuries. Some say it began during the Zhou dynasty. Others say the tradition is even older, whispered from village to village, shaped by grief and superstition. But all stories agree on one thing. A person who dies unmarried is believed to bring misfortune to the family, not intentionally, but because their spirit is incomplete. For men, especially, dying without a wife was considered tragic. It meant the family line could not continue. It meant the man would wander the afterlife alone, unable to join the ancestors who gathered at the great family shrine. And so families looked for a bride for the deceased, sometimes a woman who had also passed away, and sometimes, in unsettling cases, a living woman who agreed to become the wife of a ghost. Imagine this scene. A house wrapped in mourning cloth, a red altar lit with candles, each flame flickering like a whisper. In the corner lies a portrait, black and white, decorated with flowers and soft ribbons. The photograph is the groom, the one who will never stand again, never breathe again, yet still awaits a wedding arranged by the living. The family gathers in silence. A matchmaker arrives, carrying scrolls and charms meant to connect the world of the living with the realm of the dead. The bride, whether living or dead, is chosen not for romance, but for compatibility. Her family may agree because they believe it will bring peace to her spirit too. Sometimes two souls lost too young are joined so neither must wander alone. And sometimes the ritual carries a darker weight, a way to explain mysterious events in a household. A family might say, "Our son appears in dreams asking for a wife," or "He is lonely," or "Strange things have happened since he died." Whether you see this as superstition or grief, the truth is that families believe they had to answer that call. Ghost marriages vary from village to village, but they share eerie similarities. In some ceremonies, a life-sized paper doll represents the deceased bride or groom. The doll is dressed in red, the color of joy, love, marriage, and in folklore, the supernatural. Red attracts spirits. Red invites them. Red binds the living and the dead. In other ceremonies, a wooden tablet or the deceased person's photo is placed beside the living partner. That photograph becomes, in every spiritual sense, the spouse. The wedding begins with prayers, incense, and offerings. The living partner bows to the ancestral altar, then to the deceased spouse's portrait, acknowledging them as husband or wife. Food is offered, sweet cakes, fruit, sake, sometimes even the favorite dishes the deceased enjoyed when alive. And then comes the part that sends chills through anyone witnessing it for the first time. The moment the marriage is sealed, the paper doll bride or groom is burned. The idea is not destruction, it is transformation. Burning sends the doll to the spirit world, delivering the marriage directly to the deceased. The flames crackle loudly, sparks rising like fleeting souls into the night sky, and the bride's or groom's spirit is believed to finally receive what they were missing in life: companionship. When the ashes cool, the family exhales in relief. The spirit is no longer lonely. The household is safe again. Balance has been restored. But the ritual does not end there. In cases where a living woman marries a dead man, her life changes forever. She does not move on to another marriage. She lives as a widow from the moment of the ceremony. She may live with the dead man's family, follow his customs, honor him during festivals, even prepare offerings as if he were physically present. People outside the tradition sometimes gasp at this idea, marrying a man you will never see, never touch, never hear. But to some women, especially in older times, becoming the wife of a spirit offered security, acceptance, a home, a place in a family that would honor her. And for the deceased man, peace, belonging, a path into the afterlife without loneliness. Yet ghost marriages carry a haunting undercurrent. There are stories of families who waited too long, of daughters who refused to participate, of spirits who continued to appear in dreams, asking, begging, insisting on the ceremony. These tales are whispered in villages late at night, not to frighten, but to remind. A soul unattended is a soul unsettled. Even in modern times, when cities glow with neon lights and technology dominates life, ghost marriages still occur quietly in rural regions. The laws have changed, society has evolved, but grief, fear, and love do not disappear. If anything, they become more complex. Some families still seek ghost marriages for sons who died unexpectedly, believing they must not enter the afterlife alone. Some matchmakers still carry lists of deceased individuals waiting for a spiritual partner, and some villagers still say they've seen shadows move during these ceremonies, not threatening, but peaceful, as if someone has finally found what they were missing. Ghost marriage is not about romance. It is not about fear. It is about connection, a bridge between worlds that refuses to let death be the final word. And somewhere in a small village, under lanterns swinging in the wind, a family still sets out an extra bowl during dinner for the spirit newly welcomed into their home. Because to them, marriage doesn't end at death. Sometimes that's where it begins. The endo-cannibalism. Among the remote, mist-covered highlands of Papua New Guinea lived the Four People, a tribe whose mourning rituals would become one of the most infamous anthropological and medical mysteries in modern history. At the center of their cultural identity was a deeply spiritual practice known as endocannibalism, the ritual consumption of deceased relatives. But what began as an act of love, respect, and ancestral continuity eventually became the key to one of the deadliest neurological diseases known to science: Kuru. To understand this ritual, you first have to understand the worldview of the Four. In their beliefs, a human being was not simply a physical body. Each person possessed multiple souls, and each soul had a different role in life and after death. The Four believed that when a person died, one of these souls, called the Alma, needed proper guidance to peacefully transition to the spirit world. If this soul was not handled with care, it could linger, wander, and even cause harm to the living. So when a family member passed away, the Four did not bury or burn the body. Those methods were seen as cold, disrespectful, and even dangerous, because wild animals or decay would insult the deceased. Instead, the family would consume the body themselves. This was not cannibalism as outsiders understood it. It was a sacred duty, a final act of devotion. The Four saw it as the highest form of love, the living taking the body of the dead into themselves, so that the deceased's spiritual essence remained within the family line. Women and children were usually the ones who performed the ritual. Men often avoided eating human flesh because of traditional taboos surrounding warfare and sorcery. The women would carefully cook the body, sometimes incorporating herbs and plants believed to hold spiritual meaning. Nothing went to waste except the gallbladder. The brain, in particular, was considered particularly meaningful. It was prepared by removing the skull, mixing the tissue with vegetables, and cooking it into a stew-like dish. For generations, this practice continued without visible harm. It remained a private ritual hidden deep within the highlands, unknown to most of the world. But by the early 20th century, something strange began happening among the Four. A new, terrifying illness appeared, almost exclusively among women and children, the very members involved in the ritual. The Four called this illness Kuru, which means to shake or tremble with fear. It began subtly: a slight loss of balance, a tremor in the hands, unusual bursts of laughter. Over time, the symptoms became grotesquely unmistakable. Victims lost the ability to walk, then sit, then even swallow. Their body wasted away while their mind deteriorated, and death was inevitable. Entire villages were struck with waves of mourning as dozens of women died every year. Some families were left with no adult females at all. To the Four people, Kuru was initially believed to be caused by sorcery, someone casting spiritual revenge against a family or village. They believed that malevolent sorcerers could manipulate the souls of the dead and inflict suffering. But the true cause was far stranger and far more scientifically important. When Western researchers eventually arrived in the 1950s, they were baffled. Kuru did not behave like any known disease. It was not caused by bacteria, fungi, parasites, or viruses. It spread silently, without any obvious environmental source. For years, researchers struggled to trace its origin. The breakthrough came when scientists noticed that the disease disproportionately affected those who had participated in the endocannibalistic rituals. Specifically, it affected those who had consumed the brain, the part of the body containing the highest concentration of prions, misfolded proteins that cause other proteins in the brain to deform. These prions acted like a chain reaction, destroying the brain from within and leading to the trademark symptoms of Kuru. This discovery was monumental. Kuru became the world's first widely studied prion disease, eventually leading to the understanding of other fatal conditions such as Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease and mad cow disease. The Four's tragic epidemic ended up reshaping modern neurology. When researchers explained the connection between the rituals and the disease, many Four elders were shocked. But rather than abandon their beliefs entirely, they adapted. The idea of showing respect for the dead was still sacred, but the form of that respect changed. By the 1960s, endocannibalism gradually faded as a common practice. With time, new cases of kuru began shrinking. Today, it is essentially extinct, though a few older individuals who participated in the ritual decades ago continued developing symptoms into the early 2000s due to the disease's incredibly long incubation period. Yet the ritual is still remembered. To the fore, it was never an act of savagery or violence. It was a final embrace, a fusion of the living and the dead, meant to maintain familial unity across generations. Outsiders may find the practice disturbing, but within the cultural context, it represented the deepest form of connection, one that transcended fear, disgust, and even death. The story of the four stands as a reminder of how cultural practices can carry meanings invisible to those who do not share the worldview. It also highlights the strange intersection between tradition and science. What began as a sacred ritual became a global scientific mystery, then a landmark discovery in the study of neurological diseases. Today, anthropologists look back on the four with a mixture of respect and sorrow. Their ritual was beautiful in intention, devastating in consequence, and historically significant in the evolution of medical science. The endocannibalism of the four people remains one of the most haunting and important examples of how a cultural tradition can shape our understanding of humanity, biology, and the hidden dangers of the natural world. The Naghal land diving ritual. On the remote island of Pentecost in Vanuatu lies one of the most extreme and dangerous rituals still practiced today, a centuries-old ceremony known as Naghal, or land diving. Many people around the world know it as the original bungee jumping, but what the men of Pentecost do is far more terrifying, raw, and primal. There is no elastic cord, no harness, no modern engineering, only hand-woven vines, wooden towers that stretch to the sky, and a belief system rooted deeply in courage, fertility, and ancestral tradition. Every year between April and June, the island prepares for the ritual. It marks the yam harvest, a time of renewal and blessing for the land. According to legend, the ritual began with a story. A woman attempted to escape her abusive husband by climbing a tall tree. When he climbed after her, she jumped. She tied vines to her ankles and survived the fall, but the man, vineless, plunged to his death. From that myth emerged a powerful cultural lesson. Men must prove their bravery, and they do so by mastering the art of the fall. The preparation begins weeks in advance. A massive tower made of freshly cut wood is constructed entirely by hand, rising anywhere from 20 to 30 meters high, 65 to 98 feet. No nails, no metal. Every beam is held together by vines and branches. It looks fragile, almost too fragile, but the builders understand the materials better than any engineer. The tower leans slightly forward, so jumpers fall clear of the structure. At its base, the earth is tilled into soft soil to lessen the impact. But despite all precautions, the danger is real. Many divers suffer broken bones, concussions, and even death. Before each jump, a diver selects the vines that will become his lifeline. This is one of the most crucial parts of the ritual. The vines must be the perfect thickness, the perfect length, and most importantly, perfectly matched to the diver's weight. If the vine is too long, the jumper hits the ground at full force. If it's too short, the sudden tension can break ankles, legs, or the vine itself. Experienced elders assist in the selection, using knowledge passed down through generations. On the morning of the ceremony, drummers begin playing. Villagers gather around the tower. The air is thick with anticipation and fear. For the boys, some as young as 7 or 8 years old, Naghal is a rite of passage. For the grown men, it is a demonstration of strength, courage, and readiness to protect the community. Each diver climbs the tower barefoot, gripping the wooden beams while the entire village watches. At the top, he receives a final blessing. The vines are tied around his ankles, tightened with nothing but skill and trust. No harness, no secondary rope, only raw vines that could snap at any moment. Before jumping, the diver offers a final chant, calling on ancestors, thanking the land, or asking for protection. The drumming grows louder. The wind blows. Then, without hesitation, he leaps. The fall is dramatic, violent, and terrifying. The diver plummets headfirst, arms extended, trusting the vines to catch him only at the final moment. When the vines tighten, they snap the diver upward, bringing his head or shoulders just inches from the ground. In fact, making light contact with the earth is believed to be a blessing. It fertilizes the land for a better harvest. When done perfectly, the diver walks away with cheers from the community. When done imperfectly, the injuries can be severe: fractured necks, broken spines, or death. Yet the ritual continues year after year because for the people of Pentecost, Naghal is not entertainment. It is culture, identity, and spiritual duty. Anthropologists often call it one of the most dangerous rituals in the world, and for good reason. There are no safety nets, no rehearsals, no protective gear. Every leap is a gamble. Every jump is a conversation with death. And yet, for the men of Vanuatu, that is exactly the point. Mayan bloodletting ceremonies. If you were to stand in the center of an ancient Mayan city 1,000 years ago, among towering pyramids, stone temples, and the echoing calls of jungle birds, you might feel the air vibrate with something heavy. Not just history, not just mythology, something darker, more intimate, almost unsettling. The knowledge that this place once thrived on rituals built around pain, sacrifice, and a deep spiritual hunger. Among all the ancient Mayan practices, none is as haunting, mysterious, and profoundly symbolic as bloodletting. It wasn't just a ritual, it was a bridge between this world and the next, a direct line to the gods. And it required one thing above everything else: the willingness to spill your own blood. Unlike civilizations that sacrificed enemies or war prisoners, the Maya believed the most powerful offering they could give to the divine was their own life force, their own pain, their own vulnerability. To them, blood was the currency that kept the universe alive, and without it, the world could slip into chaos. The origins of this ritual go back thousands of years, long before the rise of massive Mayan cities like Tikal or Palenque. Early carvings show kings and queens kneeling in sacred poses, blades in hand, ready to open their own flesh. These rituals were private acts as much as public spectacles, moments where rulers proved their worth not with swords or armies, but with their ability to face agony without flinching. The heart of the ritual was simple, yet terrifyingly powerful: the extraction of blood from the body. But this wasn't random. Every cut, every piercing had symbolic meaning. For men, the blood was often drawn from the tongue, the ears, or, most notoriously, from the genitals. For women, piercing the tongue was most common, though some ceremonies were even more intense. The setting of a bloodletting ritual was almost theatrical. Picture a stone courtyard beneath the open sky, the moon illuminating the carved faces of ancestors on temple walls. Incense burned thickly in the air, swirling in ghostly patterns. A priest chanted in an ancient tongue, calling upon gods of creation, death, and rebirth. Drums rumbled in the background, slow and echoing like a second heartbeat. At the center stood the ruler or noble, dressed in elaborate garments, jade jewelry catching the firelight. In their hand they held an instrument for bloodletting: a stingray spine, a sharpened obsidian blade, or a bone needle. These weren't clumsy tools. They were carefully chosen. The stingray spine in particular was infamous. Its serrated edge made the cut jagged and agonizing, and its natural toxins ensured that the pain lingered long after the ritual ended. Before drawing blood, the participant would often perform fasting, prayer, and other purification rites. They believed the ritual had to be done with complete mental clarity. Some took hallucinogenic substances, mushrooms, fermented drinks, or the smoke of burned herbs, to enter a heightened spiritual state. Then came the moment. Under the flickering light of torches, the noble would hold out their tongue or ear, or in the most intense cases, the foreskin or the shaft of the penis, and begin the cut. Observers described the act with awe and horror. The blade glided across flesh and blood welled up instantly. The participant rarely cried out. To show pain was to show weakness. They understood their role. They weren't just leaders, they were spiritual conduits. The blood didn't just drip onto the ground. That would be wasteful, almost disrespectful. Instead, the Maya used ritual objects to catch it, strips of bark paper, woven cloth, or symbolic icons. The paper absorbed the blood, turning a deep crimson. This paper was then placed in a sacred bowl or brazier and burned, sending the essence of the offering upward in a column of smoke. It was believed that the smoke opened a portal, something like a cosmic doorway, allowing gods and ancestors to descend or communicate. But the ritual didn't end there. Something extraordinary often followed: vision quests. The participants would stare into the swirling smoke or into the darkness beyond the flames, waiting for something to emerge. With blood loss, pain, and hallucinogens altering their senses, they frequently described seeing serpents, gods, or ancestral spirits taking form from the rising smoke. One of the most famous depictions of this is from Yaxchilan, where Queen Lady Zook performed a bloodletting ritual and witnessed a visioned serpent, a massive, divine creature opening its jaws to reveal the spirit of an ancestor inside. These visions weren't hallucinations to them. They were messages, warnings, guidance. They were proof that the ritual worked, that their suffering had opened a door between the worlds. Why did the Maya do this? The answer is layered. First, they believed that their gods had shed their own blood to create humanity. The world itself was born from sacrifice, so humans were merely returning the cosmic favor. Second, bloodletting was a political tool. A ruler who could endure intense pain without fear proved their divine right to lead. It was a demonstration of strength more powerful than any battle. Third, the ritual was essential for moments of transition: coronations, births, deaths, war declarations, and the building of temples. Without bloodletting, they believed these events lacked divine sanction. For common people, bloodletting was simpler but still significant: ear piercings, tongue pricks, or small cuts to offer blood to household gods. But for rulers and nobles, the rituals were far more intense, almost theatrical in their scale and complexity. And yet, as dramatic as these rituals sound, the Maya approached them with a strange sense of calm. Pain was not an enemy, it was a gift, a tool, a sacred language that only the brave and the chosen could speak. They believed that through pain, the boundary between human and divine dissolved. Over time, as the Maya civilization declined and Spanish colonization began, bloodletting rituals disappeared. Many were banned, some were forgotten, but the carvings and codices remain, silent, elegant, and alarming reminders of a culture that embraced pain not as punishment, but as a path to the gods. Today, when we stand before the ruins of Mayan temples, the stones still seem to echo with those ancient ceremonies. The plazas feel too vast, too silent, almost as if the land remembers the rituals better than the people do. The jungle has reclaimed much of their world, but the stories have endured. And in those stories, the bloodletting ceremonies remain one of the most haunting, complex, and misunderstood spiritual traditions ever recorded. It is a reminder that throughout human history, some believed the greatest doorway to the divine wasn't found through comfort or peace. The red paint people ritual burials. If you were walking along the cold, rocky coastline of ancient New England thousands of years ago, long before the rise of cities, long before the written word, you might stumble upon a sight that would stay with you forever. A burial pit, a silent cradle of the dead, but not a simple grave. Instead, you would see bodies, men, women, and even infants, completely covered in a deep, rusty red powder. Their bones, their tools, their ornaments, all stained the color of dried blood. This was the world of the red paint people, also known by archaeologists as the Moorhead burial tradition, a mysterious culture that thrived between 3000 and 1000 BCE in what is now Maine, Massachusetts, Nova Scotia, and parts of maritime Canada. And to this day, many of their practices remain unexplained, especially their haunting burial rituals that turned the dead into blood-colored sculptures. The red paint people earned their name not from what they built or hunted, but from what they left behind. Every burial site discovered, sometimes deep underground, sometimes beneath ancient shell middens, reveals the same eerie detail. Bodies deliberately covered in red ochre, a powdered iron oxide that stains everything it touches. When archaeologists opened these sites, the bones were soaked in crimson, as if the person had been laid to rest in a pool of blood that never dried. The image is powerful, haunting, almost ritualistic. But the red paint people weren't trying to frighten anyone. To them, red was sacred. It was the color of life, the essence of vitality, and the symbol of rebirth. In many indigenous cultures across the world, red ochre represented the blood of the earth, a connection to ancestors and the spirit world. The red paint people embraced this belief so fully that their burials became symbolic journeys. When someone died, their body was painted red to prepare them for the afterlife. Archaeologists have found hundreds of these burials scattered across the northeastern coast. Some graves contained a single body, others held entire families or groups. Many were filled not just with ochre, but with astonishingly well-crafted objects. Slate spears polished to a mirror-like shine, ground stone tools, shell ornaments, bird bone whistles, and even chunks of quartz that would catch the light like frozen lightning, all placed carefully around the body. It seems the dead weren't simply buried, they were equipped, like travelers preparing for a long spiritual voyage. One of the most striking things about these burial sites is their consistency. Across vast distances and centuries of time, the rituals remained almost identical. This suggests a deeply rooted belief system, handed down through generations, focused on honoring the dead through a shared symbolic language. Imagine the ceremony. The body is laid on its back in a freshly dug pit. Family members gather around, the air filled with the smell of crushed ochre, earthy, metallic, and ancient. The powder is sprinkled, then poured, then spread gently with hands over the skin, hair, and tools. Every motion is slow and deliberate. A mother might trace red lines over the face of a lost child. A hunter's weapons might be painted as though they were alive. In some burials, the ochre is so thick that the bones appear to have been buried in a red fog, as if the living wanted to cloak the dead in the very color of existence. But why? What did they believe? We don't know for certain, because the red paint people left no written language. Everything we understand today comes from excavated bones, stone tools, and the silent patterns of their burial pits. But anthropologists have theories. One theory suggests that the red paint people believed in a cyclical afterlife, where death was a transition rather than an ending. The red ochre symbolized rebirth, the essence of life returning to the earth. Another theory proposes that ochre acted as a spiritual shield, protecting the dead from harmful spirits. Some scholars even think the bright red color was meant to make the dead more visible to deities, guiding them to a safe passage. But perhaps the most chilling theory is the simplest. They used red ochre because they believed death required the illusion of blood, a symbolic return to the womb of the earth. Some burials contain only tools and ochre, no bones. At first, archaeologists believed these were empty graves, but later studies revealed something surprising. Bodies had been buried there, but the acidic soil had dissolved the bones over thousands of years. Only the tools and the red-stained earth remained, and yet the graves were just as elaborate as those containing intact skeletons. This suggests the ritual mattered more than the physical remains. The ceremony itself, the act of painting, burying, honoring, was what carried spiritual weight. Another fascinating detail, the red paint people built enormous cemeteries, some used for generations. These weren't hidden or taboo. They were landmarks, places of memory. Each burial added to the story of a community that saw death not with fear, but with reverence. Yet despite the tenderness of their burial rituals, there is an eerie undertone to their legacy. Many graves include broken tools, intentionally snapped or burned before being buried with the dead. This suggests a belief in releasing an object's spirit, allowing it to travel with the deceased. Some scholars have compared this to rituals in ancient Europe and Asia, where weapons were killed so they could accompany their owners into the afterlife. The more we learn about the red paint people, the more mysterious they become. Around 1000 BCE, they vanished completely. Their culture dissolved without warning, replaced by later indigenous groups who did not use red ochre in the same way. Archaeologists have debated for decades what happened. Climate change, migration, disease, conflict. No one knows. All that remains are their graves, blood red and silent. And in those graves lies a strange paradox. A people who embrace death so gently, so beautifully, yet left behind a legacy that feels undeniably ghostly. Standing in a museum today, looking at a red paint people burial display, the ochre still clings to their bones like dried blood. Even after thousands of years, the color holds. You can almost imagine the ritual as it once was. The quiet chanting, the slow brushing of powder over cold skin, the hope that death was merely a doorway. It's haunting not because it is violent, but because it is intimate. These burials remind us that long before written history, humans sought meaning in the unknown. They feared death, honored it, dressed it in the color of life, and entrusted their loved ones to the spirit world with rituals both beautiful and unsettling. The red paint people lived in a world without metal, without cities, without temples. But what they left behind is one of the most profound expressions of spiritual belief in ancient North America. Their graves whisper a message older than nations, older than language. Honor the dead, remember the earth, and trust that life, like the color red, never truly fades. If you were to walk through the heart of ancient Rome 2,000 years ago, past marble temples, bustling markets, and the echoing footsteps of legionaries, you might feel that the city pulsed with a bold, unstoppable confidence. Rome prided itself on its armies, its emperors, its politics. But beneath that power lay a secret fear, an anxiety that the fate of the entire empire hinged on something fragile, something sacred. Something kept alive by a small group of women hidden behind stone walls, the Vestal Virgins. They were Rome's spiritual backbone, priestesses of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, entrusted with a single vital duty: keep the sacred fire burning. That flame symbolized Rome's life, Rome's protection, Rome's destiny. As long as it burned, the empire would stand. To ensure their purity and divine connection, Vestals took a vow unlike any other: 30 years of absolute chastity. No marriage, no relationships, no hint of desire. Their bodies belonged not to themselves, not to any man, but to the goddess and the state. And in a city built on laws, gods, and superstition, breaking that vow was not just a personal betrayal. It was treason against Rome itself. The punishment was not designed to be dramatic or symbolic. It was designed to be terrifying. A Vestal who violated her vow was buried alive. But Rome was clever in its cruelty. They believed that killing a Vestal directly would anger the gods, so they engineered a loophole. They didn't kill her. They simply placed her underground in a sealed chamber with a small lamp, water, food, and a bed. They left her there, deep in darkness, and sealed the earth above her. Nature would finish what Rome refused to admit it had started. This burial ritual, known as immurement, remains one of the most chilling punishments in ancient history. But to understand how horrifying it truly was, you have to understand who the Vestals were. Chosen as children, often around age 6, they were taken from their families and brought to the house of the Vestals, a sacred residence near the Forum. There they were trained in ritual purity, sacred duties, and discipline. They learned to walk with heads held high, to speak little, to remain untouched by scandal or gossip. They were revered, honored, even pampered by Roman standards. They were above the law. They could free prisoners with a touch. They sat in reserved seats at public events. Men lowered their heads when a Vestal passed. They were living symbols of Rome's eternal flame. But that respect came with a shadow. The higher the pedestal, the deeper the fall. Roman society was obsessed with purity, both spiritual and political. Every fault, every superstition, every omen mattered. A Vestal breaking her vow was believed to invite chaos, to anger Vesta, and to threaten the empire's survival. When disaster struck, famine, plagues, military losses, people whispered, "Did a Vestal break her vow? Which one? Has Rome been cursed?" And once suspicion began, it rarely stopped. The trial of a Vestal was not a public spectacle. It was private, controlled, overseen by the Pontifex Maximus, the high priest who held enormous power. The accused Vestal stood silent while the evidence was read. She was not allowed a lawyer. She was not allowed to defend herself. Her reputation was her only shield. If she was found innocent, she returned to the temple in quiet honor. But if she was found guilty, Rome prepared for one of its darkest rituals. The burial always took place at the Campus Celeratus, the field of wickedness, just outside the city walls. The name alone carried dread. It was a place Romans avoided, a cursed patch of ground reserved only for this one grim purpose. On the day of the execution, the condemned Vestal was dressed in white, the color of purity, irony heavy in every thread. Her veil covered her face. She walked through the city in complete silence. Crowds gathered, but they did not cheer. Even the loudest men grew quiet. Executing a Vestal was considered dangerous. The people feared divine wrath. No one wanted to look directly at her for too long. She was led to a small underground chamber. It wasn't a tomb, not in the traditional sense. It was a specially prepared room beneath the earth, large enough for a bed, a lamp, a little food. That food, bread, water, milk, oil, was symbolic. "We did not kill her," the state insisted. "We gave her the means to live. The gods chose the rest." But everyone knew the truth. As she descended the ladder into the chamber, she was forced to keep her composure. A Vestal was expected to remain dignified even in death. Some walked bravely, others collapsed, shaking, weeping, begging. The records differ. The fear was the same. Once she reached the bottom, the ladder was pulled up. A heavy stone slab slid over the entrance. Workers immediately covered it with soil, pounding it until the doorway disappeared. The earth swallowed her. Inside, she would sit in darkness. The lamp would flicker, the air would grow thin. The silence absolute. Some Vestals died quickly, panic, shock, terror. Others lasted days, their final moments spent in total isolation. Rome pretended not to know, pretending the burial was an unfortunate but necessary ritual. But the truth was far more complicated. Some Vestals were innocent. Political enemies sometimes used accusations of impurity to attack powerful families. A Vestal's reputation became a weapon. If she was tied to a noble house, condemning her could destroy their influence. And Rome, as virtuous as it claimed to be, was still a place where power ruled everything. One of the most famous cases was that of Vestal Cornelia. Accused of violating her vow, she declared, "If I am innocent, may the goddess Vesta protect me." When she descended into the chamber, witnesses described her moving with calm, even pride. Some believed she was truly innocent. Others believed she hoped her dignity would bring her justice in the afterlife. But Rome sealed the chamber anyway. There is a strange, uneasy duality in these rituals. On one hand, the Vestals were symbols of purity, guardians of Rome's spiritual heart. On the other hand, the same society that worshipped them could turn on them in an instant, burying them alive in silence. It is perhaps the purest example of Rome's philosophy: great honor, great danger. For nearly 1,000 years, the ritual continued. It survived kings, republics, emperors, wars, and plagues. It stood unchanged, as eternal as the fire the Vestals tended, until the decline of pagan Rome and the rise of Christianity, when the ancient rituals finally died out. Today, when archaeologists walk the ruins of the House of the Vestals, the marble floors seem cold, empty, silent. But beneath that silence is a history darker than most people realize. A reminder that even the most celebrated women of Rome lived under an unspoken threat. One mistake, real or fabricated, could condemn them to the earth. Their legacy is not just one of purity or devotion. It is a story of power, fear, superstition, and the terrible cost of being the symbol on which an empire rested. And deep below the modern streets of Rome, the field of wickedness still lies hidden, its secrets buried just as deeply as the women who were entombed there centuries ago. The Scaphism ritual. Scaphism is one of those ancient punishments that sits at the edge of history like a shadow no one wants to look at for too long. It wasn't merely an execution method. It was a ritual of humiliation, a performance of suffering crafted to crush a person mentally long before it destroyed them physically. The very word, scaphism, carries an eerie, unsettling weight, as if the sound of it alone hints at the horrors buried inside its meaning. In ancient Persia, where kings ruled with a mixture of divine authority and absolute power, certain crimes were considered so unforgivable that normal punishment felt too merciful. Betrayal of the king, stealing royal honor, harming the sacred order of the world. These weren't just crimes, they were violations of cosmic balance. And when someone committed such an offense, the punishment designed for them was not only meant to kill, it was meant to echo, it was meant to terrify. It was meant to mark history like a scar. Most forms of execution are direct. A blade, a rope, a spear, a stone, fast, clear, and decisive. But Scaphism was slow, unsettling, and deeply psychological. It unfolded not in a single moment of violence, but in a stretched, haunting sequence that forced the condemned person to confront their helplessness again and again. It was a ritual of unraveling, a ceremony of being stripped of dignity, control, and hope. And at the center of all surviving accounts stands one name, Mithridates. A Persian soldier under King Artaxerxes II, Mithridates wasn't known for cruelty or villainy. His crime was not murder, treason, or rebellion. It was pride. During a war, he claimed credit for a victory the king believed belonged to him. He stood before others and boasted that he, not Artaxerxes, had killed the enemy general Cyrus the Younger. It may seem small by modern standards, but in the ancient world, to claim a king's glory was to challenge his divine right. It was to place yourself above the sacred hierarchy. And so, the king ordered something unforgettable. When Mithridates learned he had been chosen for Scaphism, the fear must have been indescribable. Stories of the ritual were whispered among soldiers, passed like dark secrets by those who had never seen it but knew it should never be seen. No one asked questions. No one came close. Even those who usually enjoyed public punishments, the nobles, the spectators, the ones who felt invincible, found excuses to stay away. A ritual that even the hardened refused to witness already tells you how dark it truly was. The punishment always began the same way, with humiliation disguised as generosity. Mithridates was brought into an open space where he was forced to drink a mixture of milk and honey, thick, heavy, sickeningly sweet. He was fed again and again, past comfort, past nausea, until his body revolted. It wasn't nourishment, it was preparation, a disruption of the body. A way to break him from the inside out. Ancient people believed certain foods in excess could distort the mind, weaken the will, and make the body vulnerable. This ritualized force-feeding wasn't just cruelty, it was symbolic domination. The king had decided that Mithridates would die, but first he would be emptied of dignity. Then came the wooden structures. Two hollowed-out troughs, sometimes described as small boats, were brought forward. They were not elegant vessels, not smooth or polished. They were crude, primitive, and claustrophobic. The lower one was laid on the ground like an open coffin. The upper one hovered in the hands of waiting guards. Mithridates was placed inside the bottom structure, his back pressed to the curved interior, his body unable to shift or twist. When the top structure was lowered over him, it trapped him in a wooden shell. His head protruded through one hole, his arms through others, his legs through two more. His torso was sealed. His limbs were exposed. Movement was impossible. He had become a living piece of wood, trapped in a body he could no longer command. Once sealed in the wooden enclosure, Mithridates was carried outside, not to a dungeon, not to a prison, not to a dark corner. Instead, he was placed under the open sky, where the sun could reach him, where the air could press against him, where nature itself could look him in the face. Scaphism wasn't done in secrecy. It was done in daylight. That was the point. The victim didn't die alone. They died in full view of the world, exposed not just physically but spiritually, as if stripped of every layer that made them human. Imagine lying there, unable to move or escape, knowing every sunrise would bring heat and every sunset would bring cold. Imagine the silence of the night settling over you while you stared at the stars, unable to sleep, unable to shift your weight, unable to wipe your eyes. Isolation wasn't an accident. It was the essence of the ritual. You didn't just die. You faded. With each passing hour, Mithridates must have felt the slow march of dread tightening around him. Day after day, the sun pressed down on him like a weight. Nights brought shivering cold that seeped into his bones. He was fed again, not out of mercy, but out of cruelty. More milk, more honey. Not enough to sustain life, just enough to prolong the agony. The mixture was symbolic, sweet like a feast, but sickening like decay. It represented the twisted generosity of a king who wanted his suffering to stretch beyond the limits of endurance. Scaphism wasn't about pain alone. It was about stripping someone of their humanity until their mind could no longer hold itself together. People who survived the first few days often drifted into hallucinations, talking to invisible figures, crying out to no one, whispering broken memories into the wind. Some begged for water. Others begged for death. Others simply fell silent and stared at nothing. Psychological collapse was guaranteed. A human being cannot remain conscious, exposed, immobilized, and terrified for days without the mind breaking into pieces. Mithridates was not tied to a stake or bound to a wall. He was entombed in wood. The darkness inside that enclosure must have been suffocating. His own heartbeat echoing in his chest probably sounded like a drum in an empty hall. Time blurred. Days stretched into each other like a dream that refused to end. Nights became endless tunnels of cold and fear. Every second felt the same as the last, yet somehow worse. At some point, he must have lost track of whether he was awake or unconscious. Reality itself must have begun to warp, turning into a kind of waking nightmare. And still, the ritual continued. The world around Mithridates moved on. People lived their lives. Travelers walked past. Guards came and went. The sky changed colors over him, blue, gold, red, black, and he could do nothing but watch. There is something uniquely horrifying about being alive while the world no longer acknowledges you as part of it. The true terror of scaphism wasn't physical suffering. It was the certainty that you had been erased from the human world while still breathing. Plutarch's account says Mithridates survived many days, possibly more than 2 weeks. Whether that exact number is true, the meaning is clear. Scaphism was engineered to stretch life to its limits, to draw out each hour until time felt like a weapon. There is a kind of darkness that doesn't rely on violence at all, just on waiting, on stillness, on the slow erosion of hope. By the time the victim reached their final hours, they were no longer fully themselves. Their mind had unraveled. Their will had dissolved. Their identity had faded into something thin and fragile. Death came not as a moment of violence, but as a quiet surrender, a release from the unbearable. When the wooden structures were finally opened, the figure inside was no longer Mithridates the soldier, or Mithridates the proud man who once bragged before his peers. He was something else, something empty, something that had been slowly carved away by fear, time, and despair. The ritual was complete. The message had been delivered. The king's divine authority remained unquestioned. But the story does not simply remain in the ancient world. Scaphism lingers in modern imagination because it touches on something primal, the fear of being trapped, helpless, conscious, and forgotten. Other forms of execution kill quickly, even brutally, but they end. Scaphism was a long passage through a corridor of dread, one where every step was slow, heavy, and suffocating. The horror was not in the death, but in the waiting for death. This ritual shows how terrifying the human imagination can be when combined with absolute power. It reveals what happens when punishment becomes performance, when suffering becomes a message, when a ruler decides that fear is more useful than mercy. Historians debate whether Scaphism happened exactly as described, or whether Greek writers embellished it to make their enemies seem monstrous. Perhaps it was exaggerated, perhaps it was real, but even myths don't survive for centuries unless they speak to something deep within the human mind. Whether literal or symbolic, Scaphism represents the farthest edge of cruelty, the place where punishment stops being about justice and becomes a demonstration of dominance. And that is why this ritual continues to haunt us, because it shows what power can become when mercy dies. It shows how a human being can be unmade not through violence but through time. It shows that the worst suffering is not pain, it is hopelessness. Even now, just hearing the word scaphism creates a moment of silence, a chill, a pause in the breath, a quiet, uncomfortable shifting of the imagination, because some things once known cannot be unknown. And scaphism, whether real or mythic, remains one of the darkest ideas ever conceived, an ancient ritual where humanity was stripped away layer by layer, leaving behind not just a victim, but a memory meant to echo through history.